Monday. Today, we are going to talk about the alarming lack of education and information available about the real nature of your anxiety problem. So, that's today's topic. This is actually a lesson from chapter one of my book, The Anxious Truth. We're going to go through it for maybe 10 or 12 minutes. We're going to take some comments and questions from the audience and have a nice little chat. So, Recovery Monday, episode 3. Welcome. I'm going to let's pull the chat up and see what's going on. Hey, special note, if you're watching because you came from Dean's channel, from DLC Anxiety on his YouTube or his Facebook, welcome. Dean and I are trying a little technical experiment where he is mirroring this stream because we're going to be doing a lot of cool stuff together with this sort of thing. So yeah, there's that. If you are watching from my Facebook group, thank you, Kathy. I appreciate it. I'm not going to be able to see your name unless you follow that restream link that I post. I'll just see Facebook user. So I'll do my best to go on with the comments that way. I will do the best that I can. I'm going to put the chat overlay up right away so that you guys can see what everybody is saying. And let's get right to it. So I see a few people here already. We're already up to 19 or 20 people. Let's get into it. This will stay in the Facebook group, on my Facebook page. It will stay in my YouTube. It will be on my IGTV. You can watch it on Dean's YouTube and Dean's IGTV. So we're going to play it. It'll be everywhere. So don't worry about it. You can come back and watch. Excellent. So some guys are showing up. Love it. And let's get into it. So in this book, The Anxious Truth, these Recovery Monday lessons are all lessons right out of this book. This is chapter 1, lesson 4, I believe. Let's see. Chapter 1, lesson 3. It's called Nobody Ever Told You. So we're going to go over it really quick, right? It is Nobody Ever Told You is a lesson I wrote. This is chapter 1 of the book, is all designed to help you understand that this is not your fault. You're not broken. You're not sick. You're not beyond repair. And let's talk about the alarming lack of information and education, right? That about this. So in the book, I talked about the fact that in 2018, when I started writing The Anxious Truth, only 2 US states, 2 out of our 50, right? I can't speak for other countries, but 2 out of 50 US states mandated some sort of mental health education in our schools. 2, only 2 out of 50. Now, I'm not saying that there is no mental health education, but there were only 2 states that actually said, you know what, let's say that you have to teach a little bit about mental health. So I feel pretty confident in saying that in the Western world, at least for those of us that have already been through the primary school system, we were not really given a whole lot of information about this. School didn't teach you about anxiety and anxiety disorders. School doesn't teach you about emotional competency and literacy. School doesn't teach you about handling your feelings. You know, for me, I grew up having like health class, which was great, but you learned about like how to brush your teeth and, how to use deodorant and all of that stuff. And we didn't really talk too much about mental health, right? So the school system, at least in the West, and my friends in the UK and other Western countries seem to corroborate this, really kind of lacking. We don't really talk about these kind of topics that we're concerned with, how to handle anxiety and fear and big emotions. We don't talk about that in school. So our schools are generally failing us when it comes down to this, right? We get the most basic mental health information, but really not a whole lot. Now let's talk about other possible sources of information. So who else could teach you this sort of stuff? Well, your family and your friends. Like in the book, I called it like your tribe. Like, what did your tribe teach you this? Your parents, your siblings, your older relatives, your friends, those sort of people in your life. Did they teach you these sort of things? And the answer, generally speaking, is no, they didn't. But now, why is that? They didn't get the information either. So, in a way, asking your parents and your friends or your uncles and aunts to teach you about the nature of disordered anxiety and relating to fear and discomfort wouldn't be fair, because who taught them, right? So it's not like we're surrounded by role models and older people who have this information and are happy to hand it to us. Some of these things are very uncomfortable to talk about in some families and some social circles. You don't talk about emotions, you don't talk about mental health. I know I've done a couple of episodes looking at different segments of the population. I did with Dr. Lisa Cortez. We talked about the Latinx community, where you do not talk about mental health and you do not share your emotions and you just have to be strong. So we are in oftentimes dealing with, that sort of thing, where our tribe, the people who brought us up, the people who were older than us that we maybe looked up to and maybe could have gotten that information, didn't have it themselves, or the culture that they were in, the time that they were in, maybe just didn't support, talking about those sort of things. So they weren't too much of a help either, right? Now we get to where else could you find the information, and we fast forward sort of into the internet age, and the internet shows up. And look, I know that, the Facebook people and the social media people want to tell you that they changed the world with these sort of things, and they clearly have changed the world. But did they change it for the better? I don't know about that. Did Google change the world for the better? Yeah, sure it did. Did Facebook? Yeah, to a certain extent, but it's also very lacking. So now you didn't get information about this in your formal education. You likely did not get any information about the true nature of what we're talking about here from your tribe and your social circles and family support circles. So now fast forward to the internet age, and you would think, well, it's got to be there, right? So it is. So if you're here watching me, like, you found it, like, you found it here with me, and you find it with, I'm sure that I'm not the only person you're listening to. If you're listening to Josh Fletcher and Dean and Kim and Lauren and all the people that, I kind of am connected to, you're hearing it on the internet. But it probably took you a while to get to this. So why is that? Because while in my heart, I absolutely know that this is the way. I make a joke about it. I steal a line from The Mandalorian and say, this is the way. But while I know that science tells us and clinical data tells us that these are the best ways to conceptualize and go after these problems, they are also not the most glamorous. They're not the easiest to teach online. They're not feel good. Like when somebody says it feels like I'm going to die every time I get in my car, it's a whole lot more user friendly for the internet to say, oh, it's okay. You're fine. You're a warrior. You're powerful. You're a goddess. Nobody understands. No, we need more awareness. That's easy for the internet to do. And if the internet is anything, it's all about easy. So that attracts attention. That is sort of easily clickable. That makes us feel good. It strokes our fear. But this sort of stuff, when you tell somebody, I know it feels like you're going to die when you get in your car, but you're going to have to get in your car and drive anyway. That's not so user friendly, unfortunately, right? So it's not terribly friendly. It's not warm and fuzzy. It doesn't make people necessarily feel good. People like me are telling you that you're going to have to learn to confront that fear and move through it in more productive ways and build a new relationship with fear. We're not teaching you how to just knock it down and get rid of it. So why in God's green earth, in an internet full of affinity and like algorithms, where things that make you feel good, make you laugh, like make you feel like you're being stroked and coddled, those things naturally rise to the top. And I understand that. I totally get that. The internet is based on affinity and it's based on that sort of stuff. Somebody who says, well, you're going to have to really do scary stuff is going to get a little bit buried in that. So I still contend to this day that some of the best information about anxiety and anxiety recovers that you will find on YouTube, this giant community that is YouTube, comes from really qualified clinicians, therapists, counselors, people like that, researchers, academicians, professors that are putting out some tremendous information, but they're shooting on their phone in their office in Wisconsin somewhere, and they get 116 views on their video and no one ever hears of them. Now, sometimes it's because the most qualified people aren't really immersed in the social media world. They're not marketing, they're not promoting, they're not doing that sort of stuff. I mean, some of the folks that I've had on my podcast that that I admire so much, people like Sally Winston or Marty Seif or Dave Carbonell, like these are very prominent people in the field, and you may have read their books, like Needing to Know for Sure, or some of the other great books that we talk about. But they're not in the business of social media and promoting. They come from an older school clinician and academic world where this isn't part of the deal. So the best information about anxiety and anxiety recovery is hard to find. You have to dig for it. You have to have a friend of a friend kind of point you at it. And then many times when you find it and you find somebody like me saying, I know it feels like you're going to die when you drive, but you have to drive anyway. Admittedly, I know half the people see that and click away instantaneously. So this is why it's hard to find. And so in terms of nobody ever told you, which is the title of chapter 1, lesson 3 in The Anxious Truth, nobody ever told you because they're not rewarded for telling you. So either in the school system, it's not mandated. We have so much to teach our children back in, when we were kids, and even our kids now, we have a lot to get through in the schools. So asking them to talk about this stuff might be a tall order. It was then, maybe it is now. I don't know. But in the end, then our family and friends, they don't get the information. So we can't really help each other out if we don't know. Now, if you're watching me now you know. So you could be part of somebody's tribe and you can start to break this cycle, right? So now that you know and you are educating yourself and you are going through this process, you can actually start to pass this information to people in your social circles and your family support system, which is really great. Okay. But generally speaking, we can't rely on those folks because they're not getting the information either. And then the internet is really going to tell us all about sort of the feel good, fuzzy stuff that makes you think that you're recovering. But reading memes all day long is not recovering, even though Instagram will teach you otherwise. Then you've heard me say things like recovery is not found in the Instagram scroll. Recovery is not found in inspirational memes. Recovery is not found in watching videos again and again and again and listening to people. It's not found in people validating your fear and your problems. Those are all good things. Yes, Jade is here with zombie excellent zombie giraffes. We'll talk about that. But that might be a new thing, by the way. You and me, we invented that. So, the internet is not really going to go too deep into the nitty gritty that we talk about in general. You're going to get very fluffy advice that's really just more designed to sound good. And I'm not saying it's bad advice, but like inspirational memes and celebrities that want to talk about mental health, that's great, but it isn't really recovery. And so that's in a nutshell why nobody ever told you. And chapter one of this book, I'll put it up on the screen, how to get it. Just go to my website. Um, is all about trying to help you understand that you're not broken or ill. This isn't your fault. How would you have known? How would you have known? And I think in the book, one of the lines that I wrote was, it's literally like being blindfolded, put in a car, driven 1,000 miles away from your home in the dark, and kicked out without a map. Like, you did not know where you were going. You did not know what was happening. You did not have a map or directions. You had no instructions. And now your job, find your way home. So that's a really tall order. And if you are struggling right now and you are confused and you don't necessarily know what to do, and recovery seems so huge, and I don't know which way I'm supposed to go with it, and I hear so much different information, and why doesn't anybody talk about this like you do, Drew? That's why. That's why. So if you're confused and feeling a little lost and overwhelmed, look, who would blame you? Again, kicked out of the car, very far from home, in the dark, blindfolded without a map. How were you supposed to know? Right. So that was the crux of this lesson 103, called Nobody Ever Told You. In the next chapter, when we talk about the lesson next week, so come back next week, we're going to talk about, it's called Adrift in a Sea of Bad Information. And it starts with, first nobody told you, then everybody wanted to tell you. So next week, we're going to talk about when you do start getting information and advice, what that is. And for those of you who have been through oils and crystals and blankets and all kinds of different therapies that didn't work, and hypnosis and stuff that was supposed to cure you, come back next week. You're going to really enjoy that conversation. I know I will. We usually have fun with that. So let's look at some of the comments. I always love the comments. See who's here. We'll answer some questions. Hi from the UK. Love it. Where is IGTV? That is Instagram TV. That is IGTV. That is like Instagram's video. If you follow me on Instagram, it will be there. Tawny, your book has been a lifesaver. Thank you. Those are very kind words. And I'm super glad that it is helpful to you. That's why I wrote it. So it took me a while to get here. Ingvild from Norway into house. I always think I will not stay okay, which is never true, right? So you've always wound up okay. And we have to really be careful about how we define okay. The person who said that, I'm afraid that I won't be okay. Feeling bad. And this speaks to this topic today, right? So we don't talk about the fact that human beings go through periods of low mood or sadness, and we experience grief and loss and anger and frustration and resentment and happiness and joy, and this wide range that is like human life, right? We don't talk about that so much. So, and then we're surrounded by information that tells us, like, choose happy. We should be happy, choose happiness, vibrate at the proper frequencies. And honestly, I give this to that because this isn't about vibrating at any frequency at all. And it leads us to believe that unless we are vibrating properly and manifesting positivity and always being positive, that something is wrong with us. But the reality of it is that somebody needs to teach you that the default condition for a human being is not nirvanic joy, nor is it crushing depression and sadness. It is probably neutral. So when you get to recovered, you get to the point where you just stop thinking about how you feel. So when you feel like, well, I'm never okay, well, define okay. If you think that okay means you're radiating positivity all the time, you're supposed to be automatically happy, that's going to be super frustrating, really disappointed, and an unfair expectation for you to put on yourself and for the rest of the world to put on us. That's not fair. We're capable of being very happy sometimes. Then a lot of times we're capable of just being just neutral. That's okay too. So let's see what else we got here. I'll start to put these up on the screen too. I just so much going on the screen right now. We should know this like we know our own name. I cannot agree with that more. You guys know I'm a huge Claire Weeks fan. If there is no Claire Weeks, then there is no Anxious Truth. So I will always acknowledge Dr. Weeks, and she was dead on right. So I'm going to do a podcast episode next week. Tomorrow's episode is about the 3 C's of recovery, but next week we're going to do an episode called "Are You Following Principles or Instructions in Recovery?" So Dr. Weeks was basically saying you really need to know the principles of recovery, right? So as opposed to just asking for specific instructions on how do I deal with this? How do I deal with that? How do I deal with my stomach? How do understand the principles of recovery? And that's what Dr. Weeks was talking about. She was dead on correct. It makes a huge difference. Samuel says that mental health is completely underrated. It is. Although we are getting better at talking about that. I do want to acknowledge that, right? We just had World Mental Health Day. That's a big deal. Everybody comes out and talks about it. It's great. We're starting to talk about it more. It's important. But at the same time, some of what we talk about very big mental health issues. And I get that. Things like depression and suicide, those are really important things we do have to talk about. And sometimes we forget, that there are other parts of mental health too. It's a big, big, big topic, and we don't cover it enough. So let's see here. This is very common. So feeling sadness on and off of very high anxiety. I keep feeling increased anxiety by fearing and Googling depression. So that's what I was talking about. I think so much of this, and look, I completely and utterly will acknowledge and completely respect and validate that in a situation where somebody is being driven by OCD. And I know you've heard people like Kimberly talk about, and Jenna Overbaugh, my friends, talk about, studies that have actually shown some different electrical activity in people who have OCD. We have to validate that that's true. That's not a choice. Having OCD is not a choice in any way, shape, or form, right? But I also believe very strongly that what's on the screen right here is caused to some extent, or we contribute to it when we do not teach things like emotional competency, mental health competency, and the understanding that like we're allowed to be sad sometimes. And it leads people to believe I cannot experience my own emotions. I should not be sad. I should never be sad because I won't handle it. And it will somehow magically become depression, which it doesn't, by the way. Sadness and depression are two very different things. So let's see. Well, let's go through and try and get down a little more. So it's good. We're kind of ahead of the game here. I always think these are going to be 15 minutes and they never are. You know that. Overload today, just listening to one of my podcasts. I just finished recording this week's podcast on the 3 C's: courage, competence, confidence. That'll come out tomorrow. So check that out. Okay. So this is a big deal here. Fear is my biggest enemy right now. Fear of fear. That's huge, right? So welcome to the stream, first of all. And the fact that you can say that, like, that's really big that you can say that. Like, I know that I'm afraid of the symptoms and I'm afraid of the fear. That is a big step forward because that's understanding, right? Which is really good. And that's the stuff that we don't talk about. Like, a lot of people like, what do you mean? I'm afraid of, I'm afraid of driving. No, you're afraid of how you feel when you drive. I'm afraid of leaving my house. No, you're afraid of how you feel when you leave your house. So Bo's mom, when you get to that level, that's really good. So huge thumbs up for coming to that realization. Super important. Yeah, Nikki's talking about feel-good remedies on the internet. We're gonna talk about that next week. It's a pretty big deal, right? Let's see here. Gina, I know you want to talk about medication. I rarely talk about it. I have 3 podcast episodes on my experience with medication. I tend not to go into medication. I'm sorry. It's a very, very, very personal decision, and it sparks debate, and then people start, it gets a little ugly. So if you want to know where I stand on medication, go to theanxioustruth.com and search for antidepressant, and you'll see the 3 episodes I did on that. But I tend not to get into medication talk for that reason. We almost can't. It doesn't work out. With the zombie giraffes always makes me laugh. That's an outgrowth of a conversation in the Facebook group, which is great. Laura knows now. Hey, Laura, nice to see you. Let's see here. I was doing the warm stuff, fuzzy stuff. Okay, here we go. Let's see. I was doing the warm, fuzzy at first. It was cute, but now I do the hard things and it really helps out more. And this is a good explanation. So Samuel, thank you for sharing that. It's a good explanation as to why this type of information is a little bit buried, right? Whereas the warm fuzzy stuff, it's a whole lot easier to, show quotes from, like, the three agreements or whatever it's called. Like, it's stuff, or the principles, like those sort of like high level. And this is a conversation that I had with my buddy Joe Ryan the other day. And if you guys don't listen to Joe Ryan's podcast, you should, joeryan.com, especially if you have a traumatic background. We're talking about that. So much of popular culture mental health advice is designed to come from the 50,000-foot view, right? So when Oprah talks about it, when Dr. Phil talks about it, when people write books about it, they are writing from this 50,000-foot view, a very broad overview. So Eckhart Tolle has some really solid concepts. I'm not dismissing any of his I know I pick on him. I don't mean to pick on him, but he's just super popular, right? So his concepts are good at a very high level, but who is in the mud with you when you try to take those 50,000-foot concepts and put them into practice on a minute by minute basis, right? So, and I think this is why folks like me start to come into play here, and your therapist, like if you have one. So it's really hard because that information sells books and gets clicks and likes and follows, but it doesn't. You have to have somebody who will help you translate it down into the muck and mire when you're actually doing the work. That's why things like Choose Happiness, meh. Bethany is pointing out that I look suspiciously gleeful about that next lesson. Yeah, we'll have a good time with that. Every time we talk about anxiety cures, it always turns out to be a funny conversation, right? Okay, I'm put this up for a second. So Bo's mom, I'm going to address this for just a second. You may have said more. The scary, distant symptoms makes doing the hard things seem impossible. I'm just going to point out the word seem, and I'm going to point out that scary, dizzy sensation has never actually caused you any harm other than frightening you. You're going to have to start from that. So when you say help anyone, you're asking, how can I make this go away or not be afraid of that? What you really have to do is ask, like, well, can I get through this? And the answer is yes, I can. Yes, I can. This has never hurt me or harmed me and makes me really uncomfortable and afraid, but you can handle that and you can move through that. And then you learn that it is not harmful. It is not dangerous, no matter how dangerous it feels. And then things begin to change. So I see that you're commenting frantically, probably trying to get somebody to tell you how to be saved from that. You do not need to be saved from that. You never have been. Very important, super important. Like if you take nothing from today, take that because it's important. Let's see. No. Laura says, Laura's lovely. So since I didn't know, okay, does it make it that much harder to recover? That's a really good question. No, and I don't think that it does. And I know that you are living proof of this. Does it make it harder to recover? No, it just delayed it. And sometimes what it does is it adds a wrinkle because I encounter many people that I'm privileged to encounter and interact. It is a privilege to interact with you guys the way I get to. And I learn as much from you as hopefully you learn from me. And I do know that many people become very emotionally invested in some of that stuff that they read. They get emotionally invested in the people they follow. They get emotionally invested in the books. They want those things to work so badly. And maybe on a spiritual level or a philosophical level or a mindset level, they resonate very strongly with them. And that's fine. But then sometimes there's resistance to, like, I don't want to let go of the three principles. Like, I like it. I don't want to let go of, Eckhart Tolle. I don't want to let go of this author or that author, but it's not working for me, but I don't want to let go. Right. So sometimes that happens, but doesn't mean that it's harder to recover. It just sometimes means that we have to look and say, well, this thing that I love so much, I can still love so much, but I can maybe put it aside for now while I'm sort of crawling through the dirt and the mud, which I will acknowledge that it feels that way sometimes. I'm right on the ground doing the nitty gritty hard work. I can maybe put that aside and I can come back to that later and still love it. So sometimes that happens. If you've gotten really heavily invested in some of those alternative approaches, that's fine. You don't have to abandon them, but maybe you have to add some of this into that and maybe put that aside until later when you're feeling better. You could still love that stuff. Nina in the UK, if I could concentrate, I would read your book, but for now I love your videos. That's a very common thing that I hear all the time. And it's one of the reasons why I think I try to do this sort of stuff. And that's also why the book does well in audiobook too, because I know some people would rather listen than read. I get that. And admittedly, this book is big. There's a lot of words. It's very detailed. So I understand it could be a tough read if you're having a hard time concentrating. I get that. Define happy is very good. Happiness would have so many different definitions. I'll tell you very quick, 24 minutes. I'll tell you a very quick story about when I was seeing the one therapist that I saw, which strangely, she was not a specialist in anxiety disorders, but that's okay because she didn't pretend to be. And she knew enough to help me point myself in the right direction and get righted when I needed it. She was lovely. And she taught me that because I used to think the same thing, like, oops, sorry, didn't mean to put that up. Like I would think I can't, I would get obsessed with the idea that I could not conjure up feelings of joy, but I wasn't defining that well. Like the anxiety was twisting it and distorting it so much that I would think, but I can't feel joy. I would look at my kids and think, shouldn't I feel some sort of joy? Shouldn't I feel overwhelmed with like emotion and gratitude? I would literally, that would drive me into panic zone. When I couldn't do that, I thought something was really wrong. And she had me make a list of things. I've told the story you guys probably heard before. I sat in her office and she said, how'd you get here? I said, I drove my car here. She goes, tell me 2 things you like about your car. It was in the middle of winter. And I said, I don't know. The seat has heat. It's nice to have heated seats. And she's like, write that down. So she made me make a little list on my phone. And she said, so what happens when you turn the heat on in the car and the seat, right? When it's cold? I said, I don't know. Feels good. Makes me warm. She goes, there you go. Happy. And that was such a light bulb moment for me. And she was like, I don't understand why you think you're supposed to constantly like just bring up instantaneously these feelings of intense joy. Like who taught you that? And I'm like, nobody, I guess. But I was making that decision and that was wrong. So it was really great. She absolutely taught me that. Like happy has a very wide definition. Sometimes it's really joyful and overwhelming and amazing, like biblical happiness. And sometimes it's that, your butt is warm because your car has heated seats. That's happy too. So there you go. No, 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 no. Let's see. If you have a chapter on anxiety caused I do not. So I did not write about medication in this book. In my first book, which is called An Anxiety Story, that one you can get for free if you want to check it out. I did talk about my experience with antidepressants, but I don't have a lot of benzodiazepine experience. So can't really talk about that. And no, I did not do that. But honestly, Robin, and I want to say that you and I maybe have had this conversation before. Like, I know you want to talk about GABA and glutamate. I'm pretty sure you were the glutamate person. My experience with antidepressant withdrawal is doesn't matter. I'm not invalidating your experience. What you're going through is really difficult and it's a real physiological thing. But I watched thousands, no joke, thousands of people over a very long period of time on the Paxil Progress website go through antidepressant withdrawal, which isn't benzo withdrawal, but it is a withdrawal process. And I went through it. Then every one of them that maintained a strict focus on GABA and glutamate and receptors and trying to micromanage chemistry got nowhere. Time will fix that. Your body will know what to do. You cannot address those specific things. That is my advice to you on that. You may take it or you may not. I will respect it either way. Let's see here. It sounds like you're cobbling. You guys may have cobbling 2 different things together. I'm not sure that I follow that, but I think you guys, Old Mate and Bo's mom appear to be communicating. And I love when you guys help each other. That makes me so happy. All right, I'm gonna put this up because I see this. Are you drinking enough water? Now, what does that have to do with anything? I'm not trying to like attack anybody here, but that's one of those things that I see on the internet. And when we say nobody ever told you, drinking water has nothing to do with being afraid of your own heartbeat or being afraid of your own breath or being afraid to leave your house. Everybody should hydrate themselves. Everybody, like every human being walking the planet, should make sure that they hydrate themselves every day because it's an important part of being healthy. But you will never hear me talk about like, make sure you stay hydrated other than everybody should do that. So that's one of those things. And you see it all the time. I see it even in the accounts sometimes that I follow. Sometimes they echo those messages. Like hydration does not have anything to do with this. You can disagree with me if you want, but I will not go down that road. And I hate to see us go down that. Just drink enough water and eat well and move your body when you can, because it's important. Okay. Let's see here. The self-respect part, yes, that I'm 100% on, by the way, old mate. So that is 100%. And that's a big part of recovery too. If there's some underlying issues there, we got to talk about those, right? Super important. So good job. So let's see. Do I address health anxiety? There's health anxiety is the same thing, except the vector is switched 180 degrees. Again, on my podcast episode on health anxiety, I did one specifically on health anxiety, and also this goes with GAD. We talk about doing exposures as a doing thing. With health anxiety, it's about not doing. So not Googling, not checking, not scanning, not doing any of those things, right? That's the health anxiety thing. Did I specifically write about health anxiety in this book? I did not. I would not tell you this is a health anxiety book. I will tell you that the principles of recovery in this book apply just 180 degrees in the other way. An agoraphobic has to do things to recover. Somebody with health anxiety has to not do things to recover. So hopefully that helps. And Robin, you're welcome. I saw you say thank you. Let's see here. Bear with me. No problem. Let's see here. I'm going to try and get to the bottom here because we're going to hit the 30 minute mark. Let's see. Very similar concept, says Miss Lee. Thank you. I'm going to kind of scroll to the bottom here. It's easy to read something that describes it. So right. Bo's mom. Very good. You're so right. Okay. You're very welcome. Sorry. I'm just going to kind of scroll through. Why does it make you feel like you're going to die? Says Chris. I'll answer that really quickly. This is we all know fight or flight, right? So fight or flight is a big deal. The anxiety response is a threat detection and protection response. So it is trying to tell you that you are going to die because it thinks you're going to die. So that's kind of the way that works. Why does it make you feel that way? Because that's what this response is designed to make you feel. It needs to push you into evasive and protective and escape action. That's why. So it's just a natural part of that, right? I'm just kind of scroll, man. Really quickly, I'll try to answer this one. How do you get your therapist on the same page? That's an excellent question, Misty. And I try to cover that sometimes. It is a difficult question because you cannot force a therapist to change their paradigm, right? If they will. So you cannot change their paradigm. And I did an episode of the podcast. And again, if you guys are not listening to the podcast, I'm just going to flat out say it. It's a tremendous resource. If you are not investing the time, that's free, by the way. There's no money involved in listening to a podcast. So there are 177 episodes of that thing. Start to listen to them. Like go to theanxioustruth.com and hit the little search button and search for the term that you want. There's a really good chance that I've talked about it. So I did an episode called why did my therapist not talk about it like this? Where I explained that different therapists come from different paradigms. Humanistic therapists, Gestalt therapists, psychoanalysts, like there are a ton of different therapy paradigms, if you will. And therapists are human beings too. They mean well, but what resonates really deeply at an emotional level with a therapist might be really good in certain contexts, but it might not be good in our context. So it's hard to get your therapist on the same page if they are continually taking you through more psychodynamic or even humanistic, purely humanistic person-centered approaches and things of that nature. It's really hard to get that person to start doing exposures with you. It's really hard to do that. So sometimes it's just not a good fit with the therapist, right? I'm going to kind of scroll to the bottom here. No. Let's see here. Sorry, guys. I'm just going to try and get to the end because I'm out of time at this point. Okay. So all makes sense here. I appreciate you guys helping you guys out. It's really good. So in the end, the episode today says Recovery Monday, episode 3 is all about nobody ever told you, right? So if you did not know why any of this works and you didn't know why you feel this way and you don't know what to do about it and you're confused and you're getting all kinds of conflicting information, I will leave you with the idea that this is not your fault. Like nobody ever told you this. And now you've got some sources of information. So hopefully I'm a good source of information. I would like to think I am. All the people you see me collaborate with, those are good sources of information. So follow along with them too. Start to use this knowledge that why nobody ever told you or why the internet looks the way it does when it comes to mental health. I'm not trying to separate you from your favorite people on the internet, by the way, but it would help you to start to understand what is a good source of information and what is not, right? And sometimes I will leave you this one last thought, which I know sometimes people hate when I say, but just because it makes you feel good doesn't necessarily mean it should be a primary source of advice for you. Feeling good is great. I want everybody to feel good, and I would love to make everybody feel good if I could. But just because it makes you feel good or soothes your fear at the moment does not make it an excellent source of advice or practical recovery help. So there you go. All right, peeps. Thanks for coming by. I totally appreciate it. I will see you guys in the next one. We're doing these every Monday. There are like 30 something lessons in this book. So we got the better part of the next year mapped out for us. See me again next week at the same time in the same places. We're going to talk about all the crazy anxiety cures that probably didn't work for you. Keep commenting. I'll do my best to, work with you and get in there if I can. I know I'm not so good at the YouTube comments, but there you go. And if you do not have, I'm never going to get this right. If you don't have this book, that's how you get it. theanxioustruth.com/recovery guide, but also listen to the podcast, avail yourself of all the free information. I put a lot of time into them. It's a good resource. Go listen, get the book. If you don't have it, there's a lot of information. There's a good chance I've answered your question in this book, and I'll see you guys next Monday.